Hi there and welcome to Having a Yarn. My name is Kacy and today I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 sewing essentials. So I've been sewing since I was a teenager and I've been sewing my own clothes now for around 5 years. And over that time I've been able to kind of decide which of my sewing bits and pieces I cannot live without. And today I just wanted to share those with you. So number one is my rotary cutter and cutting board. So a lot of people still love to kind of just cut out their patterns using a normal pair of fabric scissors, but to be honest, I cannot be bothered doing all that pinning. So it was the same thing basically when I started doing quilting as well. So during the quilting stage, you can kind of pin all the layers together before you sew them. And to be honest, I don't love pinning. Does anyone love pinning? I don't know. Anyway, I particularly don't like pinning, so I would use a basting spray instead. And in the same way, I don't really like cutting out pattern pieces by having to pin them to the fabric and then cut them. And when you're working with slippery fabrics, the minute that you kind of pick them up to be able to cut them, I feel like the fabric slides a lot. So a lot of people in the sewing world use rotary cutters instead. So I adopted that pretty much straight out of the gate when I started sewing clothes. I got myself a cutting mat, a rotary cutter. I have this Fiskars rotary cutter here. I've only had to change the blade once or twice in 5 years. That's probably terrible of me. I probably should change it more, but I haven't really felt like I've needed to. It cuts through thick fabric, thin fabric, slippery fabric. Yeah, I really love it. So yeah, I couldn't go anywhere without my rotary cutter. So the next thing that goes along with that are my pattern weights. So in order to kind of keep the pattern piece where it belongs when I'm using the rotary cutter, I like to use pattern weights. I've seen a lot of people that will just use those washers that you get from from Bunnings or the hardware store. But I just have these nice kind of river rocks that I use here that I use just to weigh down the pattern pieces in order to cut them with my rotary cutter. So that is sewing essential number 2. My third sewing essential is this cutting ruler. So I got this when I first decided to make my first quilt, and I needed obviously something to cut straight lines with. But to be honest, I use this not just for quilting. I actually use it, say, if there's a pattern piece that has a straight edge, I will pop this on top of the pattern piece, and it just really allows you to get a super straight edge. Obviously for quilting I use it, and then I also use this 45-degree line if I'm cutting my own bias tape. So yeah, I really love this one. What I would love is to get a bigger one as well. So my number 3 sewing essential is my cutting ruler. So number 4 sewing essential is my quick unpick. So I'm sure this probably is in the list of every sewist's sewing essentials. This is probably not different to anyone else, but I obviously wouldn't be able to live without a quick unpick because I feel like half of sewing. So I feel like when it comes to sewing, people think when they're going to learn to sew that they're going to be sitting at the sewing machine and sewing for most of it. But to be honest, that's like 10% of sewing. I feel like 80% of sewing is ironing, some of sewing is actually sewing, and then like 10% of sewing is unpicking. So no matter how long you've been sewing for, how good you are at sewing, you will definitely need a quick unpick to be able to unpick a seam when you've maybe sewed something on the wrong way, or yeah, you need them all the time basically, so couldn't live without. So my number 5 I think, top sewing essential is my sewing gauge. So I know a lot of people don't really like sewing gauges and they're like, well, just use a measuring tape, which I often do, but sometimes I like to have this just near my machine, and if I'm just trying to measure how big that kind of seam should be, it's nice because you can kind of get it in nice and close. It also can be used, so it's actually got on here that it's a sewing gauge, a collar pointer and a button spacer. So the collar pointer, so this is the nice little top edge here that you can use to kind of turn out points. I like to use this as opposed to a lot of people will just be like, use a pencil, use a knitting needle. This isn't as sharp. The problem when you're turning out a corner, you want to like turn it out so it's nice and crisp, but you also don't want to kind of push that through your stitches. So I find the edge of that is just kind of blunt enough that it's not going to go through the stitches, but it's sharp enough that you get a really nice point. So, sewing essential number 6 is my buttonhole foot. So I was fortunate enough when I got my machine, which is now, this one just behind me here, the lovely Brother Star 15. I've had this since I was a teenager, late teens I think. So I've had it now for close to 20 years. It still works perfectly. I love it. I made a joke on Instagram the other day that I was kind of annoyed that it was still working so well because I kind of wanted to buy a fancy new machine, but can't really justify it when this one works perfectly. And what I'm really glad is that my machine came with a one-step buttonhole. So I watch a lot of sewing videos on YouTube, and I saw someone the other day who actually was making buttonholes by hand. So they didn't have the ability to even do it on a machine. They were literally kind of cutting a hole and then just like sewing around it. And I thought, oh my gosh, no way. I was fortunate enough that my machine came with a one-step buttonhole foot. And I'm so thankful because it just makes making buttonholes super quick and easy. You basically put the button in the little gauge at the top here, which will just then measure how big the buttonhole needs to be. You change a few settings on your machine and you just go ahead. It takes 10 seconds to do a buttonhole, and then you just split it open with either a quick unpick or you can use a buttonhole chisel. Number 7 of my sewing essentials that I always have sitting around is some washi tape. So I find washi tape to be really useful for a number of things in sewing and just in life in general. But one of the uses that I use it for is sometimes if I'm looking for a specific seam allowance, then I'll actually just mark up my machine with a bit of washi tape, exactly where I need to line up my fabric in order to get the appropriate seam allowance. The other thing that I use it for is when I'm quilting, I use it to basically mark out my quilting lines. So I've seen these really cool little gadgets that you can get that fit onto your machine, which means you just line up this foot with the previous line of stitches, and then it kind of makes sure that you're going straight. I haven't been able to find one of those for my machine, so instead what I do, as you can see on this unfinished quilt that I have here, so what I do is I measure where I need the next line of stitching. So you can see there's a line of stitching there. I wanted my next line here. I place on the washi tape, and then I know I just need to stitch down the side of it so you can make sure that your line's going to be perfectly straight. So yeah, I always have some washi tape hanging around for things like that. And also, how cute is this fabric? I started making it for a friend who was having a baby. The baby is now a few years old. So yeah, anyway, washi tape, love it. So my number 8 sewing essential is my little pin cushion here. So I got this little pin cushion. Everyone has their own kind of pin cushion that they love, and this one has ended up being my favourite. So I bought this off Etsy years and years ago, and it came with a piece of an elastic, which means that you could wear it on your arm. The problem I found with it, and if anyone's got a solution to this, please let me know, is that the pins kind of come through, and they can kind of come through this back section here. So as you're wearing it, I noticed that I was getting scratched all the time and it wasn't particularly comfortable. So what I did is took the elastic off, sewed on a piece of ribbon, and then it basically ties onto my machine like this. And also, I don't sit this low when I'm sewing, by the way. It's just to get me in frame. I'm sitting on a seat that's really low. Yeah, just tie it onto my machine there, so that way they're always there as I'm kind of taking pins out when I'm sewing. So coming down to my final 2 sewing essentials. So number 9 is essential. Sewing snacks and tea. So you definitely cannot sew without having some delicious sewing snacks to keep you energized throughout your project. So today I have some apricot and walnut balls that I've made in my little pottery cup that I made on my birthday last year. My lovely friend got me basically a pottery class for my birthday, and we went along to that together, and I made this little bowl and a little cup as well. So I love to put my little sewing snacks in my handmade bowl, and then a cup of tea. So recently I've really been loving wet chai. So the difference between wet and dry chai is wet chai is kind of the tea and the spices is coated in honey, and then you just basically pop that. I've got like a little Turkish tea brewer, so I pop that on the stove, fill it up with my favourite oat milk, pop in the tea, let it brew until the milk is hot enough, and then just strain it off. And I've really been loving that. So lucky last, my number 10 sewing essential is my laptop. So I cannot sew without having something on in the background. So whether that be a TV show or a movie, generally I like to kind of watch things that I have seen a lot of times before, because anyone who sews knows that you're kind of going back and forth, you're reading your pattern, you're kind of sewing and the machine's a little bit loud so you can't always hear that well. So my favourite things at the moment that I've been watching are Gilmore Girls. I love that show, seen it so many times. I'm now kind of into season 2 and been really enjoying it. And then my other one is Veep as well, which I just think is just really funny and just an enjoyable thing to have on in the background. And then classic movies like Jurassic Park is always a favourite of mine, Back to the Future, anything Star Trek, anything Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, all those kind of things is also stuff that I love having playing in the background. Thanks guys for watching. These were just kind of the top 10 things that I can't live without when it comes to sewing a project. I'd love to hear what your kind of top things are that you would be able to live without, and maybe what you're working on at the moment as well. So if you want to kind of share that, leave a comment below, and I'll chat to you guys again soon. Bye!